Hello, everyone. Olaf and I will be talking about Terraform state management. In case you don't know, Terraform is a stateful language, which means anything created in Terraform is written down in a state file.
Yeah, I might even go as far as to say that Terraform is always working whenever you're doing actions with Terraform, like plan or apply. You're always working against that state file, right? And by extension of that, it is always trying to reconcile reality with intention.
Right. I agree. Whenever you run your Terraform plan and applies, it goes out to the cloud and verifies what you have compared to like what you've written down in your Terraform, and it compares to what's out there. So if a resource is already out there in the cloud, it will see it and say, you need to import this into your state file. Otherwise, it'll cause a conflict. Generally, it happens on apply plans. It doesn't really necessarily see it there. So in this example, I have created a resource group called jforwardrg. So it already exists out in the cloud. And in my Terraform, I'm going to go ahead and try to create this resource group, call it the same thing. So we'll do a Terraform plan, and it's going to go out and look at Terraform, or look at the cloud, actually. It does, like I said, it does a comparison. And see, it goes out and looks and it's like, oh, it's going to create this resource group. It's going to be Central US, and it's going to be called J4RG. So it's going to be named the same. It's in the same region. So it should fail. I can type Terraform. Also, I have it locally here, but you can look in the state file, and I don't have anything in here at the moment.
And so effectively what you've set up here for us, Jason, is that you've got, you're creating Terraform to build a resource group, but that resource group already exists within Azure. Is that right?
Yes, and so it should cause a conflict.
Gotcha.
Because Terraform will go out to the cloud and try to run this command of creating its resource group.
Yeah, and this is reality, reconciling reality with intention, right? Your intent is to create this resource group. You see right here, you get your error message about the ID already existing, and reality was that it already existed.
Exactly. So one thing, a quick trick that I've done, and I assume you've done too, is, well, this says I need to import this resource. So you can go out to the provider documentation under resource group. Almost every, I would say every resource has a methodology of import. And this kind of shows you like how to import it into your state file. So in this case, it's Terraform import. The resource group this is the resource, the Terraform resource. This value here is the name of your resource, like the variable name that you create. And then it says, add the subscription. So this is the actual identifier of the resource according to Terraform.
This is that's the identifier according to the provider in this case, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Azure's provider IDs are rather exhaustive because they give subscription name and context and the name of the item itself.
Exactly. And sometimes, like, depending on the resource, it can get pretty long depending on what it is.
Yeah.
The nice thing is it kind of tells you in the error message, like once you have the Terraform import, what the rest of the values it thinks it should be. So you can grab, like for me, it's this Azure RM resource group.rg. And then the next value you saw was like the long name, and you can literally just steal this part here, and it will do it. So I've kind of started the typing
Convenient.
already. Yeah, I've had to do that multiple times. So like, for example, as part of the Terraform import, this is the command. Terraform import, like I said before, matches this piece, matches this piece, and then the rest of it matches that. That works probably 95% of the time, but some of the other resources can get complex, or it doesn't quite work the same. So what you do, now we want to import it so that Terraform knows what it is. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here. And you're going to wait a minute because it needs to go out to Terraform, or it needs to go out to cloud to validate it, to import it in. So the import was successful. Another command that I use to kind of check things out is Terraform state list. And it shows you this resource now exists.
Okay. So you could also do a Terraform state show and then show that particular item. Yeah, and you can copy and paste it or just type it out. And at this point, you get the more detailed information about that particular item. So at times, this may be very helpful because you can get some of the parameters that you passed into it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another spot you can look for it is actually in your state file. Though I wouldn't necessarily suggest modifying this by yourself directly. You can really mess some stuff up here. But you can see that it's a resource group, and the provider and the ID is here too. So, did you want to say something?
What I was thinking is that I feel like state is one of those things that is fairly mystic in Terraform users. So at the end of the day, all the Terraform state is this flat file sort of database, right? And so it's really not that mystical. Obviously, it is very important for the schema to be correct and for all the values to be correct. And I'm sure that recovering from typos is a nightmare if you modify the state outside of the tools that are provided. So using tools like you're showing here with the Terraform state commands, far and away a better choice than modifying by hand, as you said. But
yeah.
All that said, it's not that mystical. You can get in and look at it. You can copy values out. You could paste values into it if you really knew what you were doing.
Yeah, I think I've tinkered around with it before, trying to do some like changing from like count to for each before and trying to make some minor changes. But that's, I have a backup stored somewhere locally. That way, if I do make changes to it and I break it badly, then I can always revert it really fast.
Yeah, and Terraform will save a backup anyway. So you're going and I don't know what the frequency or the interval is of making that backup, but
it's
I know
every
that
time you
creates
do an
multiples.
apply.
Okay, not plans or anything. Yeah, makes sense.
I had to make edits to the save file, and then I would run it. So because I was using Terraform Cloud. So if you use Terraform Cloud, it manages your state file, right? And then I would pull a state file down, make an edit to it for provider changes. And then I would rerun like Terraform. I would change the backend. So locally I was running the backend. So I pull it down, change my backend to run locally, right? And then I make my change for the provider, see if it all works. And then I would change it to the backend. And it would say, I have a newer version of the state file locally. Would you like to import it up to Terraform Cloud? And then you can make changes to the state file out there. That is advanced, not recommended if you don't know what you're doing. Even if you do know what you're doing, make backups. That's the biggest statement I've got today. Going back to this,
so you've imported and you've listed and you've shown a detail level as well.
All right. So sometimes, depending on your resource, you need to remove an item from your state file. An example, Key Vault has purge protection. Super nice feature. allows you to protect your key vault so that if somebody accidentally deletes it, you can go back and recover it. And it allows it for the same thing for secrets and certificates and what's the other one? Secrets, certificates, and
Oh,
I'm forgetting. So allows you to do purge protection for the values in the key vault. Well, when you do a delete of a secret, you change it or you update it, it says that value's still there, even if you go to the GUI, it's no longer existing. So you do like a Terraform apply, it deletes the secret, but then you try to update it, it just kind of errors out. So one thing you could do is rename the secret to something else and recreate it. But sometimes if you do that within Terraform, it tries to delete the old one and then create the new one. There's some conflicts there. So one thing that I've had to do in the past is go ahead and just remove that value from your state file. So you could do a Terraform state RM. And if you remove that from the state file, then Terraform's no longer looking for that value. So you don't, it doesn't constantly try to update that value that you can't delete. Right.
Yeah, and as long as it's also something that's not configured within your Terraform configuration template itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have certainly run into this where I've removed things manually that I moved into some other place within Terraform. So if I have code written out and I want to pick up this resource group that you created and I actually want to create that in another sequence, or I want to put it inside of a module, oftentimes I've gone in and just removed the item from the state. The other thing that's related to that is Taint. So you can issue a Terraform Taint command, which I don't know semantically what it does, but effectively it does remove the item from the state or mark it in some way in the state that it needs to be redone effectively.
And on the counter of that, I've done Taint before. It's rare. Sometimes when I create Key Vault's usually my biggest nemesis. Is it one time it marked the Key Vault as tainted as it created it, like it didn't come up fast enough, so it thought it was tainted, so it needed to recreate it, and I kind of got in this loop. And what I ended up doing was untainting the Key Vault because the Key Vault was fine.
Oh, okay.
And then you can untaint the values also, and so that it doesn't think it needs to recreate it. That may have taken me a little longer than I hoped to troubleshoot that, but it's just one of those things as you start trying to learn Terraform, and like it's not as important anymore. But when you were upgrading from like Terraform 12 to 13 to 14 to 15 to 1, they actually provided upgrade paths within the CLI to go from the different versions, and that would go and modify your state file and make changes so that would work in the newer versions.
Right. Sure.
Other things to think about with your state file, because we're demoing it, I have my state file local. That's fine for the moment, but generally you want to store this in some sort of remote location, like a storage container, an S3 bucket. I think you can use a DynamoDB in AWS also. That way it's remote. You can back it up. You can encrypt the files so it's not open to the world. You can lock it down so that only certain people can access it. And then suppose you, like Olaf and I are working on the same project. I have a state file remotely and we both can reference it. Now you can only run, one person can run an apply at a time, but this enables both of us to work on the same project at the same time.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point. So if you have multiple people, this is a reason why you want to move state to remote, but it's also important then that your remote backend supports locking. So you do have to choose a backend, or you have to amend a backend to give you, like through DynamoDB or something, to provide you that locking capability on the state file itself. Now, Azure RM, if you're using an Azure storage account as your backend, it supports locking built into that.
Yeah. Oh, the other command I've had to use before was state unlock because my CLI crashed or whatnot. I've had to
Right.
unlock that state
When you
file.
control break out of an action.
But using the command line, you can do a lot of cool, powerful things. You can do some terrible things, but it's at least something that you can control and manipulate.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yes, that's all I have for this topic. Other languages they don't have its Terraform state. Oh, I'm sorry, they don't have a state file, anything associated with them. Some people prefer that. I prefer this because there's a lot of cool benefits that you get. If you import a resource, you can manipulate it within your Terraform from then on. And sometimes if something exists, you can turn around and import that resource and then change the attributes to match it. And then you've got that resource into your state file and you're good to go to manipulate it.
Right. I'll point out a couple of other things about state and the commands. So one of the commands, or actually several of the commands are being run as sort of a group or a suite with other commands that you run. So when you run a plan or an apply, there are lots of other steps that are taking place. So for instance, validation occurs, so you don't have to do Terraform validate, but if you just want to do the validate step, then you can do it that way. Likewise, if you do a Terraform, I don't remember now if it's state refresh or just refresh. I think it's state refresh, but it will do basically that remote check. So it'll check against the provider for reality, and just refresh what it knows about reality. And there are a few occasions where you would need to force that action for it to refresh. I think it's just Terraform refresh. And so you have the ability to go in and do those types of commands. So just remember that some of these things take place within the suite, and if you want to do distinct commands, there may be other commands available for you to run those separate tasks, which may take a little bit less time. The other thing I'll point out is the importance of state. Obviously, as I said, when we, and Jason echoed this, when we do an apply, when we do a plan, you are always reconciling reality with intention. So you must have an intention to do that reconciliation. Otherwise, everything is a create at that point. And I guess that's or no, I'm sorry. Everything, there is nothing to do without intention. So we have nothing without that state. So then or we have the config itself, which is the create action. But then also state is really particular about the values, or I should say is you need to be careful with the state because the values stored in the state are possibly sensitive, are most likely sensitive. So if you are creating user accounts with passwords, if you are making connections to your AWS accounts or your Azure subscriptions, that information will exist within your state, as well as all the other secrets that go along with building infrastructure within your provider. So Jason shows you Terraform state that he's looking in locally, and he's able to kind of move around and look at different values in that. But local has the risk of theft, right? Local has the risk of someone being able to take those values. It also has the risk of somebody else not having access to it, and so therefore no reconciliation possible. They're going to do a create action without the existence of that state. So be careful with your state, and I guess more than that, be mindful with your state. What is your intention? Because that's how Terraform operates. Do we want to work with multiple people? Do we have secret values that need to be secured? These are the things that you need to consider with that.
I know that some variables could be marked as sensitive, but I think that's just showing as the display when you run the command. But if you go to a state file, it's all still, it's unfortunately still there. So, that could be a big issue.
That's right.
Security people I see it in the state file. And you're like, well, I mean, I can't really get around that point. So just, like I said, just be aware of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and whereas some things output to the console, so if we define outputs, you can define those directly to the console. Everything outputs to the state, including the outputs.
Okay. Even do you know if it's set to sensitive?
Yeah,
Would
even
it
if
do
it's
that?
sensitive, it still goes into state. It just means that when Terraform displays it either as an output or I think even as a show, it
Yeah.
will show that particular parameter as sensitive. So if you created an output with a random word in it and you defined it as sensitive because it's a password, then it will just obfuscate it from your view within
Right.
the show or the output commands. But it is still in state, stored clear, and you can still access it via output if you tell it I'm a program, right? Like -json would then allow you to output, or -raw would allow you to output it because you're qualifying yourself as not really being a user at that point. But that's just sort of proving the fact that it is still in your state, and you still need to be careful with that.
Yep. And lock it down. Lock down your storage account so that everybody can see it.
For sure.
Great.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks for that explanation, Jason. That I think that was pretty good while still being concise. There are probably other things that we could go into on state because we're so dependent upon it. We don't know what those are though, so please ask questions, leave some feedback in the comments below, or join us on Discord, and we'll be happy to answer your questions there as well.
Exactly. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.